I'm guessing you're here because your perfectionism is causing you or somebody you love pain, but you're not completely sure why. You're not really sure why you go down the perfectionist rabbit hole. And I think you also might be attributing your pain to the fact that you can't achieve perfection rather than attributing your pain to that desire to be perfect, which is unrealistic and impossible. And there is an element operating here where we're kind of told to be perfect, or we're told it's good to strive for perfection. So we then don't turn around and look at that desire to be perfect as the actual problem. So I'm going to walk you through this today. There's a lot of research showing that perfectionistic tendencies are tied to many other issues like anxiety and depression. Perfectionism is not actually tied to high degrees of success. Perfectionism can be tied to procrastination, and overall, there's an underlying feeling of anxiety. Perfectionism is causing you pain because it causes everybody pain, not because you can't achieve perfection. So let's reframe how we think about perfectionism. And I'm hoping this develops a healthier way for you to think about yourself and the world and your place in the world. So many of you know I was a psychotherapist for 20 years before starting this YouTube channel to try to bring information around the world about ways to live a more joyful life. And I worked with a lot of people with anxiety, perfectionism. I've struggled with some of this myself. And if you do end up liking this video, please do give it a like. It's a big help, and subscribe to my channel for more. So let's come to the definition of perfectionism. So people will sometimes say, isn't it good to want to be perfect, right? And yes, so sometimes if you have a energy towards really striving for excellence and a drive, and it's motivating, and you have a positive attitude about it, that can be wonderful. But that's not what people usually mean when they use the term perfectionist. Merriam-Webster defines perfectionism as really a disposition or almost a personality trait where anything less than perfection is viewed as unacceptable, where unrealistic goals are set and a failure to achieve them is not just unacceptable, but a sign of your personal worthlessness. So that's the part that really differentiates perfectionism from a striving for excellence or wanting to achieve or be successful. It's really that self criticism that comes back and says that anything that hasn't achieved what is probably an impossible ideal is not just unacceptable, but it means that you're worthless, lousy, a loser, lots of labels. And really, perfection, the way we think about it when we're thinking of achieving something, is a myth. When I've given talks on this, I'll sometimes have people say, well, nature is perfect. Yep. Or higher spirit or the universe, or, they'll find things that inspire in them a feeling of perfection. And I totally understand. When you're standing at the top of a mountain, you might feel like, wow, this is perfect. But that's not the way we're using this word when we are bringing it into our work, our schoolwork, our career, writing an essay, creating a piece of art. With all of those things, there just is no such thing as perfect because we're human. All humans are fallible. So chasing perfection is kind of like chasing infinity, right? Like if you think of the concept of infinity, it's a little bit like beyond comprehension. But if you think of a point that's an infinite distance away and you cover half of the distance to get there, right? It's still an infinite distance away. You never can reach infinity. You never can reach perfection. And the real thing driving perfectionism is anxiety. So we're going to do a little quick exercise in a moment about this. But if you really go underneath that need to be perfect, there's an anxious desire to prevent a bad outcome. It's an anxiety fueled by the desire to avoid some horrible consequence that may not even be cognitively in the top of our mind, right? But it's under all of those layers, those things that drive our subconscious behaviors. And that's why it's so hard to stop, because it's not actually your cognitive, logical thinking brain. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the emotional brain, but sometimes if we're not aware of why we have those impulses, those drives, and we don't actually identify it as anxiety, that's when that can kind of take over and we end up doing things that we know don't make sense. And I'm going to pause here just for a moment to share. So, the Urban Dictionary, many of you probably know it, it comes up with like definitions of colloquial terms. And one of the ones they had in there for a perfectionist is that a perfectionist is somebody who does not understand budgets or deadlines. And it's a little bit tongue in cheek, but there's an element where you will know if you're being perfectionistic that you are spending way too much time on something that's minute, not so important, right? So there is kind of an awareness of a bit of irrationality, but you can't break through it. That's what I mean by those kind of unacknowledged, deeper emotions driving what's happening. So we need to bring that out to the surface, really look at it, and that's how we can begin to change our behavior. So, right now, just for a minute, take a deep breath, bring up a recent time where you were really feeling perfectionistic or feeling bad about yourself for not having achieved a perfect outcome. So, just bring that up. As you're doing that, check in with what feelings come up for you physically. If you really bring that memory to mind, do you notice a shift in your muscles? Do you notice tension in your body, upset stomach, any of those type of signals? And as you're thinking that through, what's the negative belief about yourself that goes with it? What would be the negative statement that you would say to yourself when you feel like you're not achieving the perfection you should achieve? And then, of course, where did you learn that? So, usually underneath perfectionism, there's some type of feeling that if I'm not perfect, I'm in danger. Or if I'm not perfect, I won't be loved. I won't be accepted. The anxiety that might come up about what other people think. What's that about, right? That's about whether you feel accepted, whether you feel like you are part of the group, or it might be a feeling of sort of unnamed danger if I'm not part of the group, if I'm not accepted, right? So if you go under it and you hit worrying about what others think, you have to go a little bit deeper because there's some fear, anxiety, or negative core belief driving that. And then there's also some tie to the future with perfectionism, usually. So it's like, if I don't do this perfectly, then what, right? If I don't do this perfectly, then you might have a whole story. It might be catastrophizing. And I do have a video on that if you do that, but it ends up in a terrible way. The future's horrible. All sorts of failures happen if you don't do this perfect. So, really going into what's under that perfectionism and how is it driving you is going to help you change this. So, if you were able to do that, if you were able to identify the physical feelings that come up for you when you feel like you're failing at being perfect, and that negative core belief, and then I said, and where did you learn that? Most of us learn it in childhood. We learn it when love and acceptance are tied to our performance. Now, it could be in some families, it might be tied to you being good. Are you well behaved? Are you helping? And then if you're not doing that stuff and you're not a perfect helper, then you might not be loved and accepted. In my family, I got a lot of academic pressure. So I was one of the sibling group. I was one of the ones who did the best in school. So if I ever came home with an A, I'd be asked, where's the A plus? Like, you're the one who's designated to get the A plus, and you better get the A plus to make the rest of us happy. Not great parenting skills, but that pressure that your worth can somehow be measured by a grade or by some kind of award or by winning first place in a sports event, or that your worth as a human is measured, is problematic, right? That's not where our worth comes from. But that kind of pressure as a child is very intense and it's very important, and it can really drive you and create a lot of anxiety. And that's the stuff that can get really lodged in the old parts of the brain, which aren't always very accessible. And then that's what gets triggered that drives our perfectionistic behavior. So, as you're going through this with the negative core belief that you came up with, could be I'm bad, I'm stupid, I'm a failure, right? I do have a free PDF that really helps with this. It both helps you identify what that negative core belief is, and then it provides 3 ways of overturning that negative core belief. So I'll put the link in the description to this video. Many people have found this very, very useful because that's the piece that really needs to be rewired and healed to allow yourself to let go of this like perfectionistic drive that is torturing you. So one of the main things I'm recommending in this video to get over this drive for perfectionism is to recognize it as anxiety. That's really going to help. And I do have a lot of videos on overcoming anxiety. But until you make that link, it's very hard to begin to make progress on this. And I want to give you 3 other concepts that are going to help you make progress as well. One is to empathize with how hard it is to be human. So many people around the planet, unfortunately, are struggling with this feeling of not being good enough. It's really tragic. It's tragic that that's how our brains are interpreting so much information these days, that we aren't good enough. And if you just empathize with, we're all good enough. We're all trying to live a challenging life on this earth as humans. And it isn't always easy, right? So being able to empathize with that broader sense of being human and what that means. And we're kind of all in it together. And I do think that because perfectionism can feel very alone. And there's also an element of it where you feel like you have to be on the top, right? Nobody's on the top. There's just is no such thing, really. But I addressed that more in a video on comparing yourself to others. But really, we're just kind of like all in this soup of humanity together. The next thing I want you to think about is to bring to mind a loved one, right? If you had a grandmother who you really loved, or it could even be a pet that you really love, I'm pretty sure that they have some imperfection that makes you love them more. So put a comment in the notes if this is resonating with you, because I would love to know that favorite person in your life or that favorite pet. What is the sort of silly imperfection that makes them even more lovable to you, right? We don't tend to love the perfect image of somebody. We love real people. And really acknowledging that in terms of how we feel about others is going to help us begin to feel that way about ourselves. We are lovable for our flaws. Okay, third concept to bring in thinking about this. Envision a fictional character that you have really resonated with recently. So it could be in a TV show you're watching, or a movie, or a novel. And honestly, it doesn't even have to be a fictional character. It could be somebody you follow in the media. But most likely, you are following them and invested in them, and you resonate with them because of their imperfections. A movie about a perfect character would be pretty boring. None of us would watch it. We would lose interest pretty quickly. Somebody who was kind of perfect, presented perfectly, said the perfect thing, and never make mistakes, like, yeah, that would be pretty boring. So we resonate with people because of their mistakes, which is because of our common humanity. All right, hope that all tied together for you. Let me know. And in my next video, I'm going to talk about the cognitive distortions that are underneath perfectionism to help you further. So subscribe, and I will see you next week.